This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 375, entitled Masculism and Global Warming. This is part 2. Carrying straight on. So it's possible that the politicians may actually decide to allow the fluffy feminists to keep control of the divorce courts so that young men continue to reject paternity, so that the world population continues to decrease, thus reducing the global warming effect due to the fact that there are fewer people, thus reducing the quantity of carbon dioxide that is emitted into the atmosphere, thus lowering the rise of the Earth's temperature, thus solving the global warming problem. It may come to this. The politicians may come to the conclusion that the survival of the planet's major cities is worth the sacrifice of the well-being of young men who are getting royally fucked financially in the divorce courts. These politicians may perform a cost-benefit analysis and decide that causing men to hate the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts is actually a good thing, because it is a very effective way to reduce the population, whose large size is the ultimate cause of the global warming problem. But young men will not tolerate being financially crucified in the hated fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts. They will vote with their feet by not marrying, not having kids, which is precisely what the politicians want. So the world population drops. Until what point? Common sense says that this state of affairs, where young men are sacrificed for the sake of reducing the world population, cannot continue, because if it does, we wipe ourselves out on a planetary scale. So at some stage, the screw the young men strategy of the politicians has to be stopped. So when should it be stopped? There are the famous Georgia Guidestones in Georgia, USA, that have written on them the goals that humanity should aim towards to create a better, happier Earth. One of those aims is to reduce the world population to about 500 million, that is, to 1/16 of the current figure of about 8 billion people. Whether this figure can be reached before men rebel so viciously that a sex war erupts is an open question. If young men realize that the older politicians are rejecting the men-fairing of the gender laws as a tool to reduce the population, as a means to solve the global warming problem, then that realization will make them bitter and all the more likely to assassinate these politicians. Millions of young men want to have kids, to be fathers, but with the divorce courts so toxic for men, and especially for fathers, millions of young men will prefer to reject marriage and paternity by living the MGTOW lifestyle. The gender politicians may be playing a risky game. They may succeed in bringing the population right down, thus solving the global warming problem, but at the risk of assassination or being voted out of office as the masses take hold of the media, hurling abuse at these politicians so that they get voted out of power. Let us assume that the population is greatly reduced via one cause or another, so that the surviving population now needs to reach a replacement level in the birth rate of 2.1 children per woman. Otherwise, if the very low birth rates of the current age continue, then we wipe ourselves out. It's just math. So when the time comes to raise the birth rate to 2.1 or a bit over, how could that be done? The rejection of marriage and paternity by young men is not the only cause of the population crash, although it is the dominant one, given the large proportion of young men who are doing it. There are other causes of the population crash. For example, the growing desire of women to have powerful, demanding careers and not wanting to have 2 kids, or even any. One of the daughters of my brother is a hotshot lawyer who is the only female partner in her international law firm. She does not want any kids, preferring to devote her considerable talents, her time and energy to her very demanding and very satisfying career. Lots of women choose to have just one kid to satisfy their maternal instincts, but prefer not to have a second for career reasons, as well as for purely financial reasons. Having a kid is very expensive. For example, in the US, it costs about $250,000 to raise a kid until it is financially independent. So how to raise the birth rate? One obvious solution is to men-fair the gender laws so that paternity is not so toxic for men, so that men get to keep their kids and not face a massive 1 chance in 4 of losing them. In brackets, half of marriages end in divorce, and in half of those divorces, the ex-wife turns into a vindictive feminazi bitch out to destroy the life of the ex-husband, taking his kids and as much money from him as she can. In brackets. The gender politicians can become more masculist in their mentalities, pushing more readily for the men-fairing of the gender laws, legislating the paternity rejection rate, so that men feel a sense of gender justice, so will look upon marriage and fatherhood as not being toxic, that men and women are being treated fairly by the law. Gender politicians can use their influence to change educational attitudes, so that half of the primary and secondary school teachers are male. Little boys need to be given male role models in primary school, rather than in today's female-dominated teacher environment, who are mostly monoconscious feminists who brainwash these little boys that men are toxic, that men are morally inferior, men are even dumber than women, etc. The gender politicians need to become a lot more masculist-oriented in their views of the world, so that the gender laws are made men-fair. Gender politicians can pay out hefty child support payments to couples who want to have kids. Gender politicians can adjust the tax code so that parents pay less tax. In the limit, if the birth rate refuses to go past the replacement rate, then governments can set up baby farms in which women are paid by the taxpayers to grow kids full-time, which are then raised by these mothers and are father-nurtured in the sense that volunteer males provide male role models to the sons and daughters in a widely organised government scheme. Governments can advertise to women and to men to have more kids, saying it is their patriotic or even their humanitarian duty to replace themselves, otherwise humanity wipes itself out. It's likely that talk of overpopulation in past decades will be replaced by talk of population collapse. So the zeitgeist needs to change, which is something that government advertising and propaganda can influence. With the gender laws men-faired, men will be a lot more willing to be fathers again. But causing that men-fairing of the gender laws will require a commitment on the part of the gender politicians, which for the reasons given above may not happen in order to solve the global warming problem. Probably in reality, the most probable scenario will be something in between these two extreme scenarios of very angry masculistic men assassinating the gender politicians and governments setting up baby farms. It's likely that the population will fall for a string of reasons, the biggest of which is paternity rejection on the part of masculistic men, given the toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites. Female careering and the growing expense of raising a single kid will also play a role in dropping the population size. Longer term, I see the global warming problem being solved by reducing the population to a manageable amount so that too little carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere to cause global warming. With far fewer people, it won't matter too much if each individual is a real polluter, because the Earth's environment will be powerful enough to repair the damage, but it may take a reduction to about 500 million people for that to happen. One way or another, it is likely in the coming decade or two that nearly any educated person will agree with the idea that the rise of masculism will have a profound impact on the global warming issue. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 370 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.